You're listening to the Dyslexia and Me podcast. Today, I'm joined by Danielle Cudjoe-Michalski, the founder of Thinking Like Coach. Danielle is a late identified Black dyslexic woman with ADHD who spent many years masking her difficulties in school, corporate and leadership spaces without the language to explain what was really happening beneath the surface. She built a successful career over 20 years in corporate roles, and now Danielle brings her lived experience alongside her professional work as a coach, consultant, trainer and TEDx speaker to support individuals and organisations to move away from survival mode. So hello, Danielle. Thank you so much for joining me today. Can you start just by telling listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So my name's Danielle Cudjoe-Michalski. I am a former microbiologist and I spent 20 years in pharmaceuticals at GSK. And in that time, I co-founded with a lovely group of people, the Neurodiversity Network, just before COVID. Then after COVID, we kind of pushed that through and it kind of became this real global area within the organisation. And we were doing talks and sharing our lived experience. And at the same time, I was doing my coaching certification. And at the end of 2023, I decided to leave GSK and co-founded and created Thinking Like Coach, which is my business, where I coach individuals who are all different neurotypes, neurodiverse, neurodivergent, ND, whatever you identify, adults. And I also work with organisations around coaching employees and managers and training. And I speak and I share my lived experience and my knowledge as an ND coach.
Thank you very much for that. That sounds a really interesting career. So what was it like growing up as a dyslexic person without having language or understanding at the time?
Well, my story is quite interesting because I had trouble with my written and reading from quite a young age. My mum realised I was a talker, and my comprehension was there. So, as you're going through like what we say is a reception or nursery, she was like, everything's fine. But as I went through to primary school and secondary school, it was very clear that I had struggles with my reading and writing. And my mum being of a Caribbean background, we have this thing called Saturday school. So we don't just go to school on Monday to Friday. We go to Saturday school and we learn about our culture, and a lot of it's around reading. And those tutors also noticed that I was struggling and I had some challenges with my English. And she actually went to my primary school and said, "Oh, I think that my daughter has reading difficulties. She might have dyslexia." My mum's not working in teacher or education after doing loads of research in the library. There's no Google back then. And the school said, no, she's perfectly fine. I had tutors. They were like, no, she's perfectly fine. So actually through my primary school and secondary school, and for international people, it's going into high school, I had no awareness of dyslexia at all. My mum mentioned to me that she'd gone to the school. She asked them, I had difficulties, that she thought I may have dyslexia, which is why I remember the word. And that's the first time I heard the word. They also said I wasn't going to go to university, which was a very interesting comment at that time. Fast forward 15 years later, I did go to university. And in my final year, I got so much anxiety and stress about doing the final project, dissertation, because of the amount of writing. I chose a lab dissertation because I thought I'd be able to write less. But I didn't really, naively and innocently, I didn't realise how much reading and how much grammar was involved. And then someone mentioned the word dyslexia in the lab, and that's the second time I ever heard it. So between 15 years difference, I'd heard that word and I asked them more information about it. A couple of months later, I was at a psychologist's door having an assessment. And as you know, Laura, and some of the people listening to this, it's quite a long, vigorous process to assess a child or an adult with dyslexia. And going through the assessment with an adult is very different to a child. There are other complexities and things you have to consider. And usually then you have to wait for a report, and that's probably the ethical and due diligence way of doing it. But I'd come to my end of my final year and was about to graduate, and the lovely gentleman actually stopped me at the door and said, I can't wait for you to have your report. You need to know that you are severely dyslexic. I don't know how it wasn't picked up. I need to rush your assessment through as soon as possible. And unfortunately, by the time I got my assessment, I'd already graduated university and there wasn't much support I could really get. I got a couple of things done, like eye screening for colours, and I got a lovely laptop just before I graduated, but I'd already done my dissertation. It was really in, and there wasn't much I could do in terms of educational support at that time. So I wasn't really aware of it at that point. And then the narrative back then was you're entering the workforce, you don't disclose, which we now totally don't agree with. We know that the so much support and the benefits of individuals finding the right level of exposure and disclosure for them, but disclosing in the workplace to get that support. But back then you were told not to disclose. And so I went into the workplace not disclosing. And within my first couple of roles, it never really got picked up. But my main role at GSK, within a month, they pulled me in and said, my manager said, I think you've got dyslexia. And I think the word dyslexia and other words were coming into the forefront of people's minds. And bearing in mind, that was probably 20 years ago. So dyslexia was probably one of the popular of the neurodiverse, neurodivergent words that we know. And then I said yes. And we worked around that in the workplace. And then my second, I suppose, journey of my neurodivergence, which was my ADHD, probably hit at the time when I left GSK and was going through health stuff. I'm very open about my hidden disabilities, about having endometriosis. So I always talk about physical fatigue and cognitive fatigue. But also I realized I was entering perimenopause and all these other things were showing up for me. And when I was talking to other people that I know, kind of connected and advocates in the dyslexic space, there seemed to be quite a few differences. And so I decided to take, after a long deliberation, an ADHD assessment and went on that journey and then got diagnosed at the end of last year with ADHD. So, and combined ADHD. It was very interesting because I thought when you work in the space, you kind of know a bit about it and then you think, oh, if I do, I've got this one. It's like a lot of people, advocates, actually, they work with individuals. They might even diagnose others. And you hear people talking about, I diagnose all these people every day. And then I didn't realize I had it, you know? Yeah. So it was very interesting. And so that's another new journey of what does that mean and how does that show up for me in a new space? So yeah, that's my two different journeys with my neurodivergence.
Yeah, they're both really interesting journeys. And looking back on your schooling, do you think there was a really big missed opportunity there? And do you think that it would have had an impact on like how you kind of approached things differently when you were at school?
100%. So let me add some context to the listeners. I'm an 80s baby, so I'm an elder millennial, as I call myself. And back at that time, if anybody remembers, particularly in the UK, I'm not sure about other countries, there was a left hand and right hand kind of dispute around no one should be writing with left hands. We should all write with our right hand. And it was a big, massive thing. There's a lot of campaigns and a lot of parents and educators were kind of confused and there was a lot of misleading information. I was left-handed. So their response was, when my mum came to talk, was that I was left-handed. And there was some kind of mirror image syndrome or something they decided to make up about it. That was the reason why I was struggling. Nothing to do with my reading and writing, because I was able to articulate myself, because I had the comprehension of what I was kind of reading, or I was able to story tell. They was like, there's no problems. I think that was a real, as we know now, that isn't the case. And I think that also made it really dampen that perspective of individuals who may be struggling with different types of communication. As I went into secondary school, I think there were things I was interested in that I just decided not to do. For example, I really was interested in law. I didn't go into it. Business, I didn't study it. Ecology, I didn't study it, mainly because I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to read all these books. I hate reading. And actually, I don't hate reading, but because of the negative connotations, I built up this narrative that I didn't like to read. And I just kind of pushed books away. Didn't really think about the reading for science, but science at school was like manual and physical, and you could see the reactions, and it was pattern and it was logical. And that was my love language. So I think if I had support in those early days, not only would it have helped me kind of build up my English skill set, my writing, my grammar comprehension, but it mainly will build up my confidence to say, actually, could I have done that course in psychology, or could I have, stepped out and done something different that was to do with reading and writing that was interests of mine, but because of this one challenge I had, I kind of was like, no. And that happened a lot, even into my career. when I got into pharmaceuticals, because people think back then, naively, before we had the internet as well, you did science experiments in the lab. We had all wonderful experiences, a lot of science experiments you don't do at school anymore because all other things show up. But that was the joy of being in the school back then. It wasn't like virtual stuff. It was like you got your hands dirty, and I loved it. It was tactical, which was great for some neurotypes. And then as I went to university, I realized I had to read more. I was like, damn it, I'm here now, so I have to try. I actually failed my chemistry A level, AS, half at A level, and I wasn't able, they didn't allow me to do my chemistry A level because I failed the first part. And the only reason I got into uni was conditional, was because they introduced this thing called BTEC, which now has evolved, but back then was completely new. My school was the first school to kind of roll out a combined BTEC qualification, and that gave me the points to get in. And the university I went to said you have to really smash the first year for you to stay, and I did, because it allowed me, it was basically a bridging between the two, the A levels and the degree. But the one thing I had to maintain now was reading and writing was a different level. So I spent a lot of my time, I talk about it a lot, about the red pen followed me right into university. And it was interesting because in science back then, they didn't really care about your grammar as long as you got the answer right, or you could kind of articulate it in a way. They didn't really care. Obviously, when you went to uni, that became a completely different level, and I really got a lot of anxiety around it, which obviously built up into my final year because I was like getting all this red pen and questions about not my content, but my grammar. And I was like, oh God, this is going to be difficult.
Yeah, and that would really knock your confidence, wouldn't it? Seeing that.
Yeah.
So you've spoken quite a lot in your socials about masking heavily during your school time and in the corporate spaces. So what did masking look like to you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think when I was younger and maybe in education, I probably wasn't, a bit delusional and innocent around masking. I probably just thought, just got to push through it. So it was, things like all my friends would go to the library to go study. Then I'd be happy because I would stay at home and I'd isolate myself, and I would go over things over and over again to try and make sure I can get it into my longer term memory. I would sketch out, the Krebs cycle and all these scientific systems to kind of understand and learn it and draw it out instead of trying to read information and trying to memorize text. I have a semi-photographic memory, so I used to really use that at university. A bit hazy now as I've got older, but really use that to remember detailed images. And I'd try and go through the textbooks and try and find any sort of alternative way of getting that information and understanding it, talking it through other people. So it was me pushing through and trying to find out ways that I could learn better and taking information better. Because a lot of people will say they grew up, particularly those who are low diagnosed and older than me, will say, I always had this feeling I was stupid. I had two prongs. I always felt that I was stupid and maybe I wasn't good enough, all of those things. But I also had another really strong, powerful prong that probably drove me in my career. And that was like, no, I'm not. And I was on another podcast and I mentioned it, and I realized I came to an aha moment of what it actually felt like. It was like I could understand English and the person's talking English to me, but when I'm talking back, I'm talking another language and they don't understand that language. So it's not my intelligence because I know both my language and the English language they're talking. So the intelligence was there and that was my logic. I understand what you're saying. I just can't get it in a way that you're going to understand what I mean, or I can tick that box. And that's the bit that I found with my dyslexia that was really struggling. And so I had stilts of mental health. I had alopecia when I was at university because I was so stressed around it. And then when I went into the workforce, there's also so many other things that showed up for me. So I was working in Hertfordshire in a very culturally different place than I have. There was not many minorities or even Black females working in the building that I was, with hundreds of other people. So you have those kind of intersectionalities that show up as well. Plus, I've got dyslexia. It's another thing I've got to add. And so even when I kind of had that conversation with my manager initially, we kind of hid it for a bit because I was a contractor until I got made permanent. And then even when I got made permanent, I went and had another diagnosis to say, oh, look, guys, I suddenly found out I'm dyslexic. And then took that to the organisation at the time. They weren't really set up in that space to be able to support ND at that time. It was very much more disability-based, but they were moving into that space. And it just sat there and collected dust most of the time. So I was sitting there fully disclosed, but not really getting support in the workplace. So my masking was, I don't know what this is. I know I've got a challenge. I'm going to work from a deficit position. I'm just going to keep on push through it. And I'm just going to hide the stress and the overwhelm that I'm feeling on a regular basis. And if I think about things like that come up and show up in my ADHD as well, like my sensory things around clothing and lights and noise. I mean, I remember I used to get told off for staying in the lab after work. And I used to get caught out by security because they'll do an announcement at 7 o'clock saying we're closing the site. And I'd be like, oh God, I've got to put my lab stuff away. I've got to leave the building. And at one point I got pulled in by my manager and my director saying, you need to really leave at a decent time, because the misunderstanding was the reason I was there was because it was quiet. There was no one else in the lab. I could concentrate. I could take my time. I worked as a microbiologist, which was all Latin. So I could take my time handwriting the microbes in Latin, which I had to learn by writing it over and over again, like lines in school. I could take my time to do that in a really calming environment where it was really busy in the day. And I still continue doing it, but that was my way of masking in the day and then trying to find pockets of a more ideal environment for me when I could.
People generally don't have a really good understanding of the amount of work that people with dyslexia have to put in to achieve well, the amount of effort, the cognitive load on the day-to-day basis just to achieve what they truly can achieve. You knew that you could do the work. The process was slower and energy intensive. How do you think that affected your confidence? Were you kind of ever annoyed that some people seem to be doing it really quickly? Or did you not really compare yourself in that sense?
Comparison overload, particularly when you're in a corporate environment, it's kind of geared up, and it still is, to compare yourself. You know, your expectations are that, I mean, my role was initially to come in and do managing the manufacturing place where we make all the pharmaceutical drugs. And then I was kind of brought in as a jack of all trades, mainly because of my personality, nothing to do with my credentials, because I know there's other people that went for that job that were way more qualified. And I was very lucky at a time when people were kind of at that point where they'd give someone a chance when they maybe might not be the strongest academic person. So I was very blessed to be able to kind of work at GSK and then become permanent. But I was a jack of all trades, so I did a bit of that, kind of monitoring the facilities where they're making the drugs, a little bit of identifying when we've got bacteria, which a lot of people know and are probably aware of since COVID. And then as I kind of progressed that, the expectation was then you start becoming a representative on the actual drug products. So when we're talking about developing drugs, you'd sit there and you'd be the expert. And so there was obviously a career progression, and within a very corporate space there, it's also an intention of you need to, have your annual reviews, your mid-year reviews. You're meant to be improving and developing, and particularly in science, in STEM, there is expectation of continuous learning, continuous awareness of your field and what's going on. Obviously, all of that involved reading. As the internet boomed and became bigger, researching. There wasn't much that we have in different fields like audiobooks and videos of it. It wasn't really as big then. And if you had the opportunity to go to a conference and listen to a talk, great. But that was always a slim amount of people that were able to go. Then you're sitting there thinking, okay, the only way I can really upskill myself is by doing this. And it's the one thing that I really struggle to do. And then you're trying to also fit in the day job. So it was really demanding. And then you're comparing yourself to everybody else because you've got people that have been there for years, and you're sitting in meetings, hearing them spill off this information, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I need to level up. I need to be where they are. On top of that, our department was very quality based, to the point where if there was an incident, a quality incident on site that came from my department in micro, we could literally end up closing a site down. And we got audited. And then a lot of people now, because of COVID, know about the MHRA and FDA. They would come and inspect, and our reports that we created would go in front of those people. Those people were highly quality people. They are people that sign off personally, not as a business or under GSK, but as an individual, and taken legal implications as an individual if they're not signed off properly. And I'd work close with them. And that was also another stress, because now I'm looking at not just me trying to get it past my manager. I've got these highly quality people whose, their written language is phenomenal, and they're looking for the slight word, the certain word that might make an auditor, go deeper into an investigation or just accept that summary. So you have to be so particular about not just what you said, but the way you said it, and how you present the data fair. So that was really difficult. And so that's when I think there was a lot of stress and my confidence was really low. I was very blessed that, I suppose in some sense, my naivety of just being young at the time, which I know as an adult, if I had to go back there, I'd probably have a lot more stress and a lot more anxiety around it. And my personality was, I got a very good director, and he was like, if you don't know, just ask. And then when some people went and did audit training, they were like, you never lie in an audit. You just tell them if you don't know, just go ask. And I think that has literally been the foundation of everything. So what I did then is I learned to go and ask. So if I had to go and bring this document I'd written to the quality team, I would have a one-to-one meeting with someone in quality and say, can you look at it first and see if it's okay? And that then slowly over time built up my confidence. And I would say when I left Micro 11 years later was probably the peak of my confidence in that department. It wasn't 5 years, it took years of confidence. And then it got to the point where my reports would go in front of the auditors. I ended up running audits as well, being in front of auditors as well, explaining work and signing off big documents, which could impact major parts of the business. So it was very, very nerve-wracking. I think I kind of tried to think of how I could approach it and get support. And that's probably the one thing that has saved me.
Yeah, it sounds like a really high-pressured role. Were you aware of other people with dyslexia? Was it spoken about within? No.
Never mentioned. I didn't know anybody had dyslexia. I didn't know anything about ADHD at all. I knew the word autism. I knew nothing. All I knew was that I had this perception that everybody else could write perfectly great, and it was just me. Obviously, my scientific head said there's probably other people that don't, but in my field, there must be, and therefore they're working in science. And I just bodged it. I just managed to sneak in the back door. Don't really belong here. So my imposter syndrome went out the roof. I shouldn't be here, and I have that for real, because when I went for my interview, there was a lady who got the wrong date. So she ended up turning up on the same day as me. The manager at the time asked, do you mind if I interview her as well on the same day? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I was speaking to her and she was so senior. So when I got the job, I asked him, why did you give me the job? Because that person had so much qualifications. It goes back to my comment about academia. He's like, yeah, but you didn't realize that when we told you to go for tea and I was interviewing her, that was still the interview. I was like, so there I was at tea thinking, oh, the interview's done, chatting about my life and learning to drive and just talking to the team. He goes, and then the team really liked you. And so that was one of the reasons you got the job. But I still felt like I sneaked in the back door. And so there was nothing around it. And I wasn't really surrounded. I mean, in my circle or network, in the working place, there wasn't anybody. In my personal life, I have so many dyslexic friends. So many. I actually have, and this might make you giggle a bit, Laura. I've actually got a friend. We worked in science together. And we did the thing that was sensible. We both weren't great at English. So we proofread each other's work. When I found out I was dyslexic, I said, oh, it's so funny if you found out you were dyslexic. She went for assessment and she found out that she was dyslexic too. And she's like, oh, so we're both proofreading each other's work, probably missing all these mistakes because we, again, get it. And we could understand in between the lines. And then I found two friends that I was just naturally gravitated to at university were also dyslexic. They knew it in schooling. And I have quite a few dyslexic people I know now. But in my workplace, no one was really talking about it. And the only time I got to meet another dyslexic person was when an intern came in, an amazing, amazing woman now, a great friend of mine, who I was mentoring. And she'd have been diagnosed through school. So she came in as an intern, and it was very aware from day one that they knew that she was dyslexic. And then they're like, oh, Danielle's dyslexic. So I was kind of mentoring her and kind of giving some advice around how, after, been in that role for the last 6-7 years. And I was also young. She was quite young. So we were kind of like giving that. And that's the first time that I could see, oh, that's where the struggles are. Oh, you've got that oh, I did nothing in my personal life to talk about dyslexia. I never did any research. I never was an advocate, anything when I was in micro. It's not until I moved out of micro, I started looking at my strengths with the help of a coach and a mentor, that I got into this advocacy space more.
I think coaching is so important to build, and for an individual who has dyslexia to have a network around them of people who really understand dyslexia, and if they experience it themselves as well, so that you don't feel as isolated. Because statistically, we're looking at between 10 and 20% of the population having dyslexia, but there doesn't seem to be many adults talking about it. Also, alongside that, you've got children that may be diagnosed as a child, but the realization that it doesn't disappear. You develop compensatory strategies as you go through life, but at certain stages in your life, as an adult, if you are dyslexic, you're going to have difficulties. You might have difficulties all the time. You might just have difficulties at different life stages and when whatever life throws at you at different periods. So I think that's quite important for people to understand. It's not something that you just outgrow. And working with a coach is a fantastic way to kind of build that relationship. So you do quite a lot of coaching, don't you? What do you feel what kind of support do you like to offer your neurodivergent adults that come to you for coaching?
Yeah, so I wanted to also add that it's interesting for people to be aware that there is still a perception, particularly in certain corporate spaces, of this kind of outgrowing or being able to kind of cope mentality when it comes to dyslexia. And I want, I suppose, the listeners to know that that isn't always the case. You might find, like you said, mechanisms to help you cope in one area, but if you shift roles or responsibilities, that may change. And I get a lot of my clients come in saying, done fantastic. I got my coping strategies for this role, but then I got promoted. And you think, wow, fantastic. No, because now I've got these responsibilities and I've got this expectation that I've also put on myself. And we have an underlining ways of productivity and the ways of leadership and the ways of working that is universal, particularly across some of those kind of like really institutional industries and sectors, about what working looks like. And then there's also one that we put on ourselves. And that ends up being the challenge that we have. And I say that because that wasn't my last diagnosis of dyslexia. My last diagnosis of dyslexia was when I had to do my project management course for the US. And they didn't seem to think that a diagnosis that you had older than 5 years ago was not good enough for you to get the accommodations for an exam. So I had to go and get diagnosed again to say, nope, still dyslexic, to get the support. And these are, things that we now know today. We hope that organisations today realise that that is not the case and that should not be supported. And we know that this is something that people are dealing with and impacted throughout their life. So I get clients from all different areas of life. I get entrepreneurs and business owners who have tried to build up their businesses and really struggling. I get individuals in the workplace who are getting promotion, or they've kind of struggled and it's not sustainable. And one of the things I talk about a lot in my work is around sustainability, because you do get the other side of individuals who do fantastically well in their career, but then they get to the point where they burn out and they get so overwhelmed. So pacing and sustainability in the way we're working is really important. But I think one of the things that I really get a response from my clients around, it's the first time as an adult where they're actually allowed space to kind of be a bit what they feel selfish and really focus on their self. So we can range from what are the challenges that show up for you in regards to your dyslexia or your neurodivergence, and then what's your life look like? What does that look like and feel like for you? Someone might say, yeah, I have a challenge with, holding information short term, but actually in their job, it's not really a big of a deal than other people. It can be a massive, drastic impact in their work. We really kind of unpack what it is what those challenges show up for them. Again, like you said, there's other things that show up that impact, like stress, sleep, diet, life, peaks and troughs, seasons. At this time of the year, if I do coaching with a lot of individuals, it's really, really hard for them to try and think about sometimes a positive mindset around some of the things we're looking at. So we start from a neutral base of go get data. As a scientist, I use my scientist things. I'm like, data points. Let's go and try it in the field, bring it back without judgment and see what it means. In the summertime, I get a lot of, yeah, I've done this. Look, I was able to get this done. And I saw this and I'm like, okay, so how would that look like in the winter? When it's a bit grayer and a bit colder. So we work on strategies to build it up so they've got a toolkit of things that they can dip into. And with my dyslexia clients, I don't focus specifically on their grammar and their kind of like reading capacity. I'm building more of the confidence around the self-talk they have and the shame they have and the expectation that I need to be at the same level of this in this struggle that I am. Some of the scripts they hold about what they believe about themselves, to be able to then guide them to someone like yourself who might be able to say, actually, I can help you with real techniques specifically on a specific part of your grammar or tools around your reading. I do have some tools around those, but I will refer if it comes to that point where, okay, I think you need a specialist who actually does the training side of things and actually can help you improve in those areas. In my coaching, as you know, with coaching, it's not about us guiding, it's about us exploring with you. So you want your client to turn up with, this is what the concern I have. Okay, we unpack it and we just go through that journey together. And I'm questioning you and answering you and maybe giving you developmental tasks to challenge your perception about things. So you're building up that confidence. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this approach versus some others is I worked in an international multi-million-pound pharmaceutical company that had accommodations before some other organizations didn't. And yet I still saw people struggle to help themselves in all different parts of neurodivergence. And a lot of it came from the tools are there, but the confidence wasn't. So that's where I decided to focus on.
You've also worked with organisations, haven't you? So from your perspective, what practical changes actually make a difference in an organisation for people with neurodivergence?
For me, the practical changes is not necessarily policy. It's about how do you build that neuro-inclusive culture. And when I mean neuro-inclusive, I mean neuro-inclusive for neurodivergent, neurodiverse, ND, neurospicy, neurotypical, everybody to be able to show up. That can be challenging when it comes down to every day. Your first point of call for most individuals are going to be their manager and their teams. So it's how do you create that environment within your teams and give the resources to your manager to be able to have those conversations. I bring it always back to coaching because I think managers understanding the benefits and the strengths and about having coaching questions, understanding different ways of people's communication and how things can overwhelm their people and their teams, and then using that data to be able to create spaces where they can create an environment where people can come and say, I have a challenge with X, I need support, is great. Another thing I'm doing a lot of reflection about in the corporate space recently, and I think it's all well and good if people say, it's all well and good, Danielle, if you've got like a big company like GSK who's got loads of money and everything, but what if I've got a smaller business? And I'm always saying work from where you're at. So we look at your capacity and look at your capability, and that includes your financial capability. As an NDer, I think one thing that we strive for is transparency about what is available. So if you're looking to say, look, we can't get Grammarly, like my organisation couldn't use Grammarly because of, at the time, security issues with within the pharmaceutical and approvals. But if you say, okay, there's an alternative, or yeah, we're going to try and trial you with this, or, work with them, co-create what accommodations and support looks like. And then my one other thing for corporates, particularly senior leaders who may not have the direct lines of big teams, is support those managers who do. They have a team of different types of people, different neurodivergences, different neurotypes, and those individuals and managers sometimes struggle. So I would say, how are you supporting your line managers? Your first line, they are the best people for you. You need those people. Their energy, their connection with the teams are going to be making people feel inclusive and want to stay and want to do great in their role. So it's about how are you able to support them and allow them to also delegate? So I had a coaching session with the manager yesterday, And we spent so much time talking about her boundaries as a manager. How could she use her team to delegate, to support different people in her team who are neurodivergent while she's dealing through a massive business change? So she's still taking accountability. She's putting her hand up and saying, I'm there for you, but I'm going to be transparent. We're going through a change and therefore my capacity is limited. Find some other people that will be able to support you. All of that is talk. I haven't mentioned anything to do with money. I haven't mentioned anything to do with tech or AI. Those things are great, but that cultural bit is really important, particularly as we've got a workforce that is boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs, and more, who've got different experiences with tech and AI and systems. The one thing to remember is we're all human, and go back to that point of how do we have a conversation? How do we make sure that we're being inclusive and co-creating that together? It's not about an ND person coming in and demanding X, Y, and Z. It's about, okay, this is what I would like and this is what helps me show up and do my best in my role. Okay, this is what we've got as an organization. Where do we come in between and co-create that? And how do we monitor that as time? So maybe then, oh, we've got some funding, we can get that software you want. Actually, there's a number of people in the organization now that's willing to invest. I think we're at that point now where the pendulum is coming down a bit and we're starting to have to think about being creative and being more collaborative.
Fantastic point there. And I think communication is so important, and that realization that it's not a one size fits all or a once and done approach. Is this constant co-creation. So Danielle, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on. Finally, can you just tell listeners how they can connect with you?
Yes. So if you want to connect with me, several social media places, but you can email me and you can call me as well. So you can go online and find that information. On Instagram under @thinkinglikecoach, where you can find maybe a bit about my journey, my days, a bit more fun and comedy, and I share information and talk a little bit about coaching, pacing, how to sustain your energy and how to manage your energy and not necessarily your time. I also talk about the intersectionalities between hidden disability and neurodivergence as well. And then you can always connect with me on LinkedIn under Danielle Cudjoe-Michalski, also in Facebook as well under Thinking Like Coach. And you can always book a free half-an-hour call with me if you're thinking about coaching or you're just kind of trying to figure out your way. And I know that Laura does an amazing work with diagnosis and supporting others. But if anybody else also wants any support, I've got a wide network as well that can always help as well. So if I'm not the best person, I will try and find someone who can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Danielle.
Thank you.
I hope that you've enjoyed listening to Danielle's story. All of the links are in the show notes, so go and check her out. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in for today's episode. Please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast, and I'll see you all next time.